Okay, so good morning. So one of the things we're going to look at today is where you would put your website. Okay, we don't seem to have any screen at all. Any luck there? Okay. I'll just fiddle some wires around and see. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is some of the issues surrounding putting your website online. So last semester in SAP 6007, you would have learned a bit of HTML, a bit of CSS. You learned a lot of HTML, a lot of CSS, and a bit of JavaScript, and you were able to make a website, but that website was only on your own machine. So right now, that is on your hard disk at home somewhere, on your laptop there, or on a USB stick somewhere, or on a CIT server somewhere. It's not on the web where anyone can find it. And what we're going to look at today are some of the issues surrounding how you actually put it on the web where people can see it. So you have, a website on your machine at the moment, Dan's Bikes, whatever, it looks lovely. How do you get from that to dansbikes.com where people can go have a look? So there are a couple of things surrounding that. The first thing we're going to look at is domain names. So machines on the internet are identified by an IP address. So that's a unique number that each device has. That's a short one there, I think. As time went by, we kind of ran out of numbers, so I think there's a new format now. It makes them a bit longer. But anyway, the idea is that there's a whole big bunch of numbers to identify each machine. So when I plug this into my office downstairs, this little laptop here has a unique number that's unique on the whole planet. So you can imagine there's a lot of devices. Okay? Remembering those numbers would be quite difficult. Let's face it. There was a time people had to remember numbers to do things, but we don't even remember phone numbers now anymore. And so what we do is we have short names, memorable names, that we use in place of those numbers. So if I had a website, and it was at 123.4567.890.123, instead of that, I could just say my website is colinmanning.com. Now, there may already be a colinmanning.com. Apologies to him. He's out there somewhere. And what a name server does is that it takes the names and looks up the numbers and sends back the number. So if you've done some networking already, you probably know way more about this than I do already. So, okay. So the idea is that you send off the name to a name server, it comes back with the IP address. And there are, chains of those and a hierarchy of those. And I think someone told me there's like 7, main domain name servers on the planet in bunkers in various places. And so if aliens came and wanted to take out the entire internet, they probably have to take out all 7 of those sites. Okay? Now, how do you go about getting a name though? So anybody can buy a domain name, but some of them are restricted to various, some of them have criteria. So there are also different domain name registrars. There are a whole bunch of people who will register domain names for you, and they would have licenses or contracts with the main registration bodies. Okay, there was a time there was it was a bit monopolistic, but it's more of a free for all now. And often you can get a domain name with your hosting when you buy some hosting. So .com and .net are very common. So dansbikes.com, not an unusual thing. .net, people often use .net when .com isn't available, so you might go dansbikes.net. But net is often, for no particular reason, just by convention, used maybe for sort of networky type things, or infrastructure type things. So aircom.net, but aircom is an ISP. So it makes sense. dansbikes.net doesn't quite sound right. .info came about around, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something. There was quite a lot of pressure on the .com domain names. People just running out. Which is why you get lots of funny names, things spelt wrong. Flickr, F-L-I-K-R. It's very hard to come up with a word in English that hasn't been registered already. So there were moves to create more top-level domain names. .info came along, but it didn't take off quite so well. It was meant to be a solution to the congestion in .com, but .info sort of became sort of the dark alley of the internet. It ended up with a lot of porn there and stuff. .us is restricted to entities that reside in the US. So if you live in the US, so if I was living in the US, I could claim my .colinmanning.us if I wanted. But because I'm not in the US, I can't. .edu was used for American colleges, for example. If CIT wanted to get Cork.edu, it would have to fulfill some criteria, which might be difficult. .ie is the top level domain name, that's what we call them, for Ireland. So you could get dansbikes.ie. The IE is actually quite restrictive. They really want to satisfy themselves that you are, entitled to the domain name. So if I wanted dansbikes.com and I told them I was a company that sold bikes, and my name was Dan, whatever, or the name of the company was Dan's Bikes, they'd want to see, some headed note paper or maybe registration at the company's office or, something like that. They're fairly tight with the domain names that they give out. Okay. The other ones then, like .tk is some island somewhere, and you can get .tk's for free if you want. Okay. So the idea is that you choose your domain name and then you pay someone to register it. There's a lot of competition, fairly cutthroat in fact. So you can register domain names fairly cheaply. And then you just have to pay a renewal fee every year or whatever. Okay. Now, cyber squatting is the practice of getting a domain name that you really have no business having apart from the fact that you want to act the bollocks. So the people that registered bertieahern.com and maryharney.com and put a load of porn there really were up to no good, it's not like one of the people working in the company was called Mary Harney. They were just acting the bollocks. Similarly, it can be. That was an interesting case because a lot of the time, if someone is cyber squatting, it's because they want to feed off someone else's notoriety. So if I registered gagatunes.com or something, right? Lady Gaga might argue that I'm just trying to trade off of her notoriety. And somebody that had Gaga in a domain name was probably trying to trade off her brand, you know. The Mary Harney and Bertie Ahern cases were different in that they were more at the extortion end of the scale, where they were put there to embarrass those people in the hope that they would give them money to stop. And similarly, then there might be a situation where someone is more entitled to a particular domain name than someone else. So let's suppose 15, 20 years ago, I registered Madonna.com. Okay? The singer Madonna could well argue that she's more entitled to Madonna.com than I am. I would probably want to demonstrate what business I had with it. No, if I don't know, it was a hairdresser or something and it was called Madonna and I registered it as Madonna.com, then I could probably argue, well, you know, tough luck Madonna, I got there first. But it would be a case of whether I was just doing it for the divilment or up to no good. That someone would make a judgment on that. So we have this dispute resolution mechanism where, to save you going to court, there's sort of a, you know, domain name court where you can make your case. And if they rule then that you are more entitled to the domain name than someone else, then you get it. So that's an interesting one. And we'll just have a look. You can look that up. So, domain name dispute resolution policy, and basically, if someone you think is acting the bollocks, you can go there and try and stop them. There's a new kind of extortion racket now as well, where you might sort of slander or libel someone on the web, and then you could set up a reputation management firm. And you see a lot of those. And we'll talk about Google rankings and stuff later in the module. But the idea is that you register a whole bunch of manky websites. So you could, you know, make 50 or 100 websites about what a big bollocks Colin Manning is. And then you might have a business that helps people improve their reputation online. And for a small fee of a couple of $1,000s a year, you might make all those things go away. So when someone Googles Colin Manning, they don't get all those Colin Manning is a bollocks site. So there are some scam artists out there still, but at least you have the ICANN domain resolution policy to help you out there. Okay. You can, oops, I meant to go online. So you can look up if a domain name is gone. So many hosting companies will do the domain registration for you, and you can look up to see, you know, if the one you want is still there. Now, let us look at something else. No. So once you have your website, then you can put it on a server somewhere. It's possible to set up your server at home, but like, why would you bother? I mean, if you're really tight with money, you could maybe get a machine and plug it into your modem and set up a web server there, and your ISP mightn't mind. A lot of them do mind. And if your ISP didn't mind, you could probably have a web server there in your house for free, you know, but you'd have to worry about backing it up. And if you had very little traffic, you'd be grand, you know. But if you started to get more and more traffic, it might come faster than the little machine in the corner could handle, and also your internet service provider might not be happy. So lots of companies can host your website for you. You can have aircom.net, for example. There's a very big one in the US called GoDaddy.com. HostCentric is another one, but there's a whole bunch of them. depending on your needs, you might or might not want to host it in a particular place. So if we look here, so this is GoDaddy, and they have a whole bunch of packages. Now that says they're starting at 79 cents a month. I suspect that's one of those special offers where they hook you in and then jack up the price. Because of course, once you have your website all set up, it is a bit of a pain in the arse to move it to somewhere else. So people tend to be a bit lazy, so they do try and get you in. Okay. But there are various options. Just a sec there, and I'll see if I can show you. Sorry for not sorting out that a minute ago when I came in first. Okay. So you can go to these people like GoDaddy. You can see the different products they offer. Hosting, web hosting. Sorry, not connected yet. So for €4 a month, they'll host your website. Now they have different packages. For $4.50 a month, you can have a whole bunch of ones, and you can have different features. So it's a bit like a mobile phone plan. You know, if you think you're not going to use it a lot, you might go for the cheap one. You might get so much traffic for free every month. If you think you're going to be the next Angry Birds, you might decide to go for a bigger package. The great thing about using a service somewhere else, apart from, instead of setting it up at home, is that it's very scalable. You could start off small. So if you have, let's say you decide you want to start an alternative to Facebook or something, and it starts off really small, and you get more and more people. It may become difficult for you to do that yourself at home with a server plugged into your, the plug in the kitchen. Whereas if you have it online, you can just scale it and grow it as needs be. Okay, so you can look then at the different packages. So this one would allow you one website, which you could have multiple websites. There's the amount of bandwidth you could have every month. Some of them put a cap on the amount of bandwidth you could have, which would mean how many hits you could get. And beyond a certain amount, then you have to pay a bit more. The amount of space, depending on your website. If it's just a static website where you're just publishing some content, 100 gigs is loads. But if you want to start doing fancy stuff then, like having a MySQL database, you end up, starting to get into territory where you might want to pay. You could have email addresses associated with it. You can have 100, 500 or loads, various things like that. So if you want to start doing e-commerce, for example, if you want to start allowing people, if you want people to log in with an account, and if you want people to be able to leave comments, things like that, that starts to get more complex. You start to pay for more of those things. Okay? And there are all different options there. So I'd encourage you to go have a look at different providers and see the kinds of things you can get. Certainly, $4 or $5 a month wouldn't break the bank if you wanted to start your internet publishing empire. This seems to be an Irish one, or at least one that's presenting us with an Irish interface. It may well be in Florida somewhere, and you phone this number and talk to someone there. Again, they have different options, different pricing. For $2.50 a month, you can get 5 gigs of storage and 10 gigs of bandwidth. And then depending on what you go for, it goes up. Whoops, sorry. Ay Dios. No. Okay, so you can see there are a bunch of different options. If for some reason it was very important to you that your customers in Ireland got your pages very, very quickly, then you might decide you wanted to go for an Irish hosting option rather than some random place in the US. Also, the web poses some interesting issues in terms of jurisdiction. So if you put stuff up on a web server somewhere and someone somewhere has a problem with that, where do they go to sort out that problem? If the physical web server is actually in Florida, then they might have to go to court in Florida to stop you doing whatever you're doing. Similarly, if the server is in Dublin, then they may have to go to court in Dublin to do whatever it is they want to do. You're starting to see now some web hosting firms actually advertising that their servers are in the EU. And that's partly because the EU has much greater data protection laws, much better data protection laws. And so some people would feel that if their content, if their website was physically in the EU, then their customers would be more comfortable giving them information. Whereas if you turn over information to a US website, that might be more likely to be sold on or whatever. Okay? So in some instances, the physical location of the server can be a factor, but very often even it's not even clear where that might be. Where is Google? I mean, we know Google has offices in California. We know that somehow, miraculously, most of Google's money seems to go through the office in Dublin. Similarly, where is Amazon? Where is stuff stored? These companies are so big and have so many servers and so many server farms, we call them, around the world, that even pinning down the physical location of some file is meaningless, really. There may be, if you pay Amazon, for example, to host your website for you, well, there may be copies of that, in many places. If you publish something libelous about me and I want to take you to court, where do I go? To go where that file is physically stored and insist that it be removed doesn't make sense. It's, it could be, it's up in the cloud somewhere, it could be anywhere. So there are all these very interesting issues around hosting, because where something is physically stored and where it's viewed may be very different. But in practical terms anyway, if you want to make a website and put it online, you're looking at just, a couple of euro a month, which wouldn't break the bank at all. So if you say you want to, publish a magazine or something online, you could do that yourself. We've seen also something like Blogger, that you can just, you can just publish a blog for free, and it's free, and you don't even have to have ads appear on that if you don't want. So there are a whole bunch of options. What we're going to look at now is some of the slightly dull technical aspects of that. Okay, so you have your web page. How do you actually get it onto the web? And there are a number of things to consider. One very important thing, and I think we might have mentioned this when you were doing web development fundamentals last semester, is the file names. Many web servers are case sensitive when it comes to file names. So Dan's page with an uppercase D and an uppercase P is not the same as Dan's page in all lowercase. Now on your machine at home, that doesn't matter. But once it goes onto the web server, it might matter a whole lot. And spaces and punctuation are generally not well tolerated. The reason for this is that a lot of machines on the internet are Unix machines. And that's quite an old operating system, and so some of the rules surrounding that are a bit restrictive. So if you were absolutely confident that your web page was going to end up on a Microsoft server, then you might be a bit more loose with your file names. But if it's to go on a Unix machine, you need to be more strict. Also, mypage.html and mypage.htm are not the same thing at all. So as a rule, you should pick one and stick with it. So you should either pick HTML or HTM and then go with that. The cool people do HTML. And generally what people do is they go with all lowercase .html. If you just do that then all the time, you don't have difficulties when you upload your stuff to the web. One problem people run into is that many desktop operating systems obscure the extension of known file types. So if you have, birthdayparty.jpg, it'll just show you in the file listing birthday party, and it'll hide the .jpg. And of course, most people don't care whether it's a GIF or a TIFF or whatever, but you do, because you need to know the exact file name. Is it .jpg or is it .jpeg? Because those are two different files. If you think it's .jpg when in actual fact it's .jpeg, then you have a problem. So if you're doing this kind of stuff at home, you should tell your operating system in the options that you want to see the full file names of all the files. Some web authoring tools can actually communicate directly with the web servers. So let's say I have paid GoDaddy my $5 a month, and it's given me a username and password that I can log in and upload the files. Something like Dreamweaver, for example, or Microsoft Front Page might allow me, I could say, look, this is my URL, it's colinmanning.com, this is my username, this is my password, and then it would connect up to that server and do ding, 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 ding when I go publish, blah, 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 and it'll be all done. So there are a lot of tools that automate this process. And depending on the tool you're using, you can just do that. Apple has sort of abandoned iWeb. So Dreamweaver is the main tool that people would use in a professional context. Now, other tools then, so you have tools that can generate web pages for you. So even in Microsoft Word, you can say save as a web page. And it'll save, mypage.htm or something. So some website generation tools will put all the files in a folder for you, and then you have to manually upload them to the server. And of course, if your authoring tool is just Notepad, which is what you used last semester, then you have to do all that yourself. So a website can be uploaded to a web server by using a web interface, if it's available, or you can use this thing called File Transfer Protocol, FTP. And actually you can talk about FTP as a verb. You can say, I was FTPing my files last night and the server went down and it didn't happen. Okay. So this is a file manager from hostcentric.com. And it looks very like what happens if you want to upload a photograph to Facebook or something from the desktop. Obviously from your phone, if you have the Facebook app, you just do blah, blah, blah. But if you're on a desktop, you usually have to say, browse and go get the file and then select and it'll upload it. So you can log in to GoDaddy would look something like this as well. Most of the hosting services would have some web interface where you can log in and you can see your directory structure. You might have a bunch of different folders inside in your site. You might have a folder just for the images. and then you can put the files in there. And so that's, some of them are a bit clunky, but you know, they're easy enough to use. Okay? However, as card-carrying nerds, I think you should, at least once in your life, go old school and use FTP to transfer a website from your desktop machine to a server. So what we're going to look at in the next few minutes then are the commands that you would use in Unix to FTP your files. And I'll try and organize a lab, hopefully this week, where we'll actually go and do that. So the website that you did last semester, you might be able to put up on the internet for the world to see. Just for the crack, we'll delete it in a few weeks. Okay? So a great many of the machines on the internet are Unix machines. And Unix is an operating system that was developed at the University of California at Berkeley in the 60s. A lot of other things going on in Berkeley in the 60s as well, may account for some of the peculiarities of Unix. Okay? So Unix is pretty unforgiving as an interface. This is what computing was like 20, 30 years ago. Really, it wasn't until the Mac came out. When was the Mac? 30 years ago? Last week or something? It was a big celebration. It wasn't really until we had Macs that computing wasn't command line based. So in my day at college, you would have booted up the computer and you would have just got a prompt. And you had to type the things you wanted to happen to make things happen. So it wasn't like you would go and double click on whatever or drag and drop. You know, if you deleted files, you had to, you know, use a command line. Okay? So there's a whole bunch of commands. So I mean, it literally does look like this. So this is an FTP. Well, this is a terminal session on my machine at home, actually. And all you had was a prompt, and you had to type the right commands. So ls, for example, lists all the files in a directory. So we're in a particular directory, you say ls, and it shows you them all. So at any one time, a particular directory is current. So it's not like in Windows where you can have, you know, 10 folders open and you can see what's in all of them, and you can drag and drop from one to the other. At any one time, you are in a particular directory. ls minus l will list the files in long format, give you some information and stuff about them. I'll put these notes online where you can get them somewhere, and we'll just tear through them really. So mv is short for move, and it allows you to move files from one place to another. So mv file1.html, file2.html basically renames file 1, file 2. cp would copy a file. So cp file1.html, file2.html would make a copy of file 1 and call it file 2. rm removes or deletes. You can have a star, which is like a wild card. So you could say rm dan_.html, and that would delete dan1.html, danny2.html, daniel.html. It would get rid of them all. So you can navigate directories then. You have mkdir, cw, and cd and pwd. So make dir and remove dir basically makes a new directory or deletes a directory. So we call them directories, folders, the same thing. rmdir will delete a directory. Some servers, as a security precaution, might want you to delete everything in the folder before you can delete the folder. cd would allow you to change directory. So if you're in a directory and there's a folder in there, there's a subdirectory in there called my site, you can say cd my site to go in there. Now, if my site is off yon somewhere, you can't just hop straight to it. So it's quite restricted. You're quite restricted in what you can do. If you're using a Unix machine, then getting to grips with paths is really key to being a ninja with that. So sometimes you don't have to actually go to the directory you're interested in. You can just talk about it from where you are. So if I was in a folder in a directory and I could see Ireland, if Ireland was in there, I could say ls Ireland/Cork/Ballincollig, and that would show me the contents of the Ballincollig directory without mine having to go there. Okay. Now the relative path assumes that we're in the directory above Ireland. CD ... will move up a level. So if you say CD and the directory name, it'll move down into it. But if you're just moving up, there's only one way up, so it doesn't need the name. So for example, if I was in the folder Pablo Honey, I could move directly to Zuropa by saying CD ... /, which would bring me into Radiohead, .. / would bring me up into music, and then U2 would bring me down into U2, and Zuropa would bring me down into Zuropa. So that's what we mean by a path and getting to grips with the paths. PWD tells you what directory you're in, and that's very useful because it can get very confusing. And so then there are special commands then that you need for your FTP session. So the first thing you need to do is you need to open up an FTP session. So you would say FTP myserver.com, or you might say open myserver.com. That would work too. In the past, anonymous FTP was quite common, and it was a way to move things around the internet, move files around before the web. You really wouldn't bother with anonymous FTP now. If you had a server, you wouldn't allow people to FTP anonymously into it. You just slap stuff on a web server and let them get it that way. So CD would navigate then, once you're in your FTP session, CD lets you navigate around the remote machine. And so what you do is you get to the folder on the remote machine where you want the files to go. You go to the folder on the local machine where the files are, and then you do a put command, which will copy from one place to the next. So CD navigates on the remote machine, ls gives you the contents of the local machine, and then you can look up things in the local machine as well. There are two modes of transfer. There's ASCII and there's binary. For, say, a HTML file, you should use ASCII, but for an image, you should use binary. So you can switch between modes. So you can say ASCII to switch to ASCII, and you can use you switch to binary mode as well. Okay. Get will take files from the remote server and copy them to your local machine. And we haven't you can specify long paths if you want, but the simplest way is to line up the local and the remote folders so that you're in the right position, and then you just do a straightforward put. And so mget will get you multiple copies. Sorry, not multiple copies. Mget will copy, several files at a time. So you could say mget dan star, and it would get, daniel.html, danny.txt, things like that. And put then is what you use to actually go from the local machine to the remote machine. And mput, so if you have everything lined up, you could say mput star.html, and it'll copy up all the HTML files. You could say input star.jpg, it'll copy up all the JPEGs. Then you can, exit, quit, or buy. There's a bunch of different ways to leave. FTP is generally not secure at all. So you wouldn't typically use FTP for something that was very secure. But obviously, if you're putting information on a website, those HTML files were going to be public anyway, so it's not a big deal. And there we go. So just to show you there, as it turns out on a Mac, underneath it all, it's running Unix. So you can do all that from the terminal command. The terminal, rather. So, and what you get is just something that looks like that. And from here, you're supposed to be able to know to go like open, blah, 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 dot, well, you probably get something like open FTP colinmanning.com or something. You just have to type the commands and move your files around that way. So I'm going to try and set it up so that you can do this just once, okay, in your life. Okay, often there are programs that make that easier. A nice one on the Mac, for example, is a thing called Fetch. And with Fetch, what you do is you just put in the address and the username and the password, and then it'll give you folders, and you can just drag and drop and whatever. It's much easier to do. But since you're at big school, we're going to make a FTP to a Unix server, copy your files up just once, just so you can moan in the pub about how bad it is and how tough it was in the old days. Okay? Any questions? So I'll put those notes online where you can find them. There'll be a link on the blog somewhere.